Okay. Morning, Year 8. How are you? Hope you're all okay. I'm continuing on from the video I did last week about apartheid, which was focused on the Sharpeville protest and how that became a turning point in the kind of end of peaceful protests and the start of more militant or violent protests against apartheid in South Africa. Now, hopefully you've all had a chance to watch my last video and have a go at your quiz. Texts are coming home to those of you that got a particularly high score and got those quizzes done, so well done to you. Keep it up. So today I'm going to talk about the next three kind of key events in the struggle to end apartheid. Now, they are the Rivonia Trial, Steve Biko and his student protest, and the Soweto Uprising of 1976. Okay, I'm going to start with the Rivonia Trial because it follows on very nicely from what happened at Sharpeville, and then I mentioned last time how the ANC and the PAC, the two anti-apartheid political groups that were banned, went underground, not literally, but went secret, and they became more militant in their protests, and they did things like sabotage government buildings, cut telephone wires, blow up bits of railway line and that kind of thing. Now, in 1963, the Spear of the Nation, who was the ANC military branch, okay, so they were linked to the ANC and they were called Spear of the Nation, and Nelson Mandela was part of this. Okay, their headquarters were raided and a number of the leaders were arrested, and they were put on trial in Rivonia. Okay, that was the place, and it was a really famous trial, okay, where Mandela and other leaders were charged with sabotage and guerrilla warfare. They were found guilty and they were sentenced to life in prison. And this is probably the part that you've heard about, where Nelson Mandela was sent to Robben Island, where he was jailed for 22 years. And this became a massive setback or a blow for the apartheid movement, okay? It was something that really, all their leaders were either banned people, jailed, or in exile out of South Africa. So it was a huge blow for the people who were protesting and fighting to end apartheid. Now, I just want to take a little moment to read to you the speech that Mandela made at that trial, okay, because I think it's really powerful. So he said, "During my lifetime, I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve, but, if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." I've also put a link below the video to watch Idris Elba, who is playing Mandela in the Mandela movie, on trial, and it's the sort of the movie version of the Rivonia Trial, which is really quite powerful and definitely worth having a look at. So that was in 1963, and the protest in the 1960s really sort of tailed off, okay? However, it was revived in the 1970s, in the next decade, by a man called Steve Biko, and he really focused on student protest and youth protest. And he brought about this idea, or he celebrated this idea of black consciousness and black pride, okay? It was all about pride in being black, and the idea that blacks would end their dependence on white South Africans, okay? However, really sadly, in 1977, so after kind of 7 years or so of this student protest, Steve Biko was arrested, tortured, and then killed in custody, and he was only 30 years old. And the official statement from the authorities didn't admit that he had been killed and murdered in custody while he was arrested. They just said that they weren't sure how he had died. Okay, and he was only 30 years old. Now, something that I really recommend if you're interested in Steve Biko and his protests in the 1970s is looking at the film Cry Freedom. It's really excellent if you're able to access that. I'll put the name as well in the box below. Even if you just have a look at the trailer, okay, you get a real sense of Steve Biko and his protest in the 1970s. Now, one of the key events as part of these student protests, and one of the most famous, I'm going to move slightly to the side, in South African history was the Soweto Protest. Okay, now this happened in 1976, before Steve Biko was murdered in jail. And it was a tragic student protest where students were protesting, and these weren't university students. These were secondary school students for the most part, but there were some primary school students as well. And they lived in a Soweto Township. Okay, so a township is an area where a lot of black South Africans were forced to live, obviously a very poor, difficult area in the time of apartheid. And these were secondary students mostly, but some primary students were there. Now, they were protesting against being taught in the language of Afrikaans. They saw it as the language of their white oppressors, and they wanted to be taught in English because they saw that as the international language that would help them and enable them to get better jobs and to leave the move away from the situations that they were born into. Now, it wasn't a violent protest. It was students going on a march, refusing to go to school that day, and most of them were singing. Now, tragically, this protest became violent and the police shot at the protesters. Now, there is a very famous photograph that you may well have seen before and that I've linked in the clip below, in the box below. There is a link to a video about this photograph, and it's showing the student Hector Peterson, who was of junior school age, being shot and carried by his brother with his sister next to him, obviously absolutely shocked and grief-stricken about what's just happened to her little brother. Now, Hector Peterson was not the only student who was shot. It's really difficult to know how many people and students and young people were shot during the Soweto protests, but estimates put it between 150 and some estimates say as many as 700 people. Now, this again became a massive turning point in 1975, and violence and unrest swept South Africa from this point, okay? And it also massively meant that resistance intensified, so more people were resisting, more people were protesting, the international pressure increased. So you'll see in the video that I've linked under here that goes into Soweto in more detail, you'll see some clips from the British news that they were showing, okay? So people started to put on sanctions against the South African government to pressure them to end the apartheid state. The economy also struggled and went into decline, and the government was seriously under threat. So from this point onwards, we begin to see in the 1980s the slow breaking down of the apartheid state and a massive increase in protests. But I'm going to go into that in more detail next week. So once you finish watching this, I really strongly recommend that you have a look at some of the further clips I've recommended below that look more into the Rivonia Trial, the Cry Freedom and Steve Biko, and also the Soweto incident. Excuse my brother who just walked in to say hello. And I really strongly recommend you have a look at those in more detail and then have a go at the quiz that will be on Show My Homework, okay? So aim to get at least 8 out of 10 ideally, but you get 3 goes, okay? So you can always improve your score. Lovely to see you all. Hope you have a nice half term. So your next homework won't be next Friday, but the following Friday, okay? Have a good one. Take care now. Bye.